Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I'm back to read a second chapter in the new book that we're reading, Little House in the Big Woods. This is by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And the name of this chapter is Winter Days and Winter Nights. The first snow came, and with it bitter cold. Every morning, Pa took his gun and traps and was gone all day in the big woods, setting the small traps for muskrats and minks along the creeks, the medium-sized traps for foxes and wolves in the woods. He set out the big bear traps, hoping to get a fat bear before they all went to their den for the winter. One morning, he came back. He took the horses and sled and hurried away again. He had shot a bear. Laura and Mary jumped up and down and clapped their hands. They were so glad. And here is maybe kind of a picture of a bear. Right there. Mary shouted, "I want the drumstick! I want the drumstick!" Mary did not know how big a bear's drumstick is. When Pa came back, he had both a bear and a pig in the wagon. He had gone through the woods with a big bear trap in his hands and a gun on his shoulder. When he walked around a big pine tree covered with snow, and the bear was behind the tree. The bear had just killed the pig and was picking it up to eat it. Pa said the bear was standing up on its hind legs, holding the pig in its paws just as though they were hands. Pa shot the bear, and there was no way of knowing where the pig came from, nor whose pig it was. "So I just brought home the bacon," Pa said. Bacon is usually made from pork, which is pig. There was plenty of fresh meat to last for a long time. The days and nights were so cold that the pork in the box and the bear meat hanging in the little shed outside the back door were solidly frozen and did not thaw. Back then, they didn't have refrigerators and freezers like we do now. When Ma wanted fresh meat for dinner, Pa took the axe and cut off a chunk of frozen bear meat or pork. But the sausage balls or the salt pork or the smoked hams and the venison, Ma could get for herself from the shed or the attic. Snow kept coming till it was drifted and banked against the house. In the mornings, the window panes were covered with frost and beautiful pictures of trees and flowers and fairies. Ma said that Jack Frost came in the night and made the pictures while everyone was asleep. Laura thought that Jack Frost was a little man all snowy white, wearing a glittery white pointed cap and soft white knee-high boots made of deerskin. His coat was white and his mittens were white, and he did not carry a gun on his back, but in his hands he had shining, sharp tools with which he carved the pictures. Laura and Mary were allowed to take Ma's thimble. Now, thimble is something that when women would sew by hand, and today, if they will, it goes over your pointer finger, sometimes your thumb, so that when they push a needle, you don't get stuck with it. It's usually metal or plastic, and it just covers it, like it almost looks like a little cup. They were allowed to take Ma's thimble, make pretty patterns of circles in the frost of the glass, but they never spoiled the pictures that Jack Frost had made in the night. When they put their mouths close to the pane and blew their breath on it, the white frost melted, and ran in drops down the glass. Then they could see the drifts of snow outdoors and the great trees standing bare and black, making thin blue shadows on the white snow. Laura and Mary helped Ma with the work. Every morning there were dishes to wipe. Mary wiped more of them than Laura because she was bigger, but Laura always carefully wiped her own little cup and plate. By the time the dishes were all set away, the trundle bed was aired. Then, standing one on each side, Laura and Mary straightened the covers, tucked them in well at the foot of the side and the sides, plumped up the pillows and put them in place. Then Ma pushed the trundle bed into its place under the big bed. And I'll show you a picture of the girls working. That's their little trundle bed. After this was done, Ma began the work that belonged to that day. Each day had its own proper work. Ma used to say, wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, mend on Wednesday, churn on Thursday, clean on Friday, bake on Saturday, rest on Sunday. So, let's see. Do you know what ironing is? It used to be that clothes and material, whenever you washed it, would get very wrinkly. And so you would get an iron, and that would be something hot, and you would press it against it till all those wrinkles came out. Another thing you might not know what it is churning. Now, when you had your own milk cow, you would get milk, and if you let it sit, at the top of the milk would rise the fat that's on that, and it's called cream. And they would skim off that cream and they would put it in their churn. A churn was a container, and it usually had some sort of a stick or paddle, and it would go up and down and up and down, and that would be churning it. And when you were mixing it like that, when I was a kid, we used a glass jar. We would put some cream in it and we would shake it. And as long as it kept getting mixed, the fat would come together and separate from what milk was in there, the buttermilk that was in there. And when you were all done, you had butter. So, you know what the rest of the things are. Laura liked the churning and the baking days best in all the week. In winter, the cream was not yellow as it was in the summer, and butter churned from it was white and not so pretty because the cows couldn't get out and eat grass. Ma liked everything on her table to be pretty, so in the wintertime, she colored the butter. How do you think she did that? After she put the cream in the tall crockery churn and set it near the stove to warm, she washed and scraped a long orange-colored carrot. Then she grated it on the bottom of an old leaky tin pan that Pa had punched full of nail holes for her. Ma rubbed the carrot against the roughness until she'd rubbed it all through the holes. When she lifted up the pan, there was soft, juicy carrots in a mound. She put this in a little pan of milk on the stove. When the milk was hot, she poured milk and carrot into a cloth bag. Then she squeezed the bright yellow milk into the churn, where it colored all the cream. Now the butter would be nice and yellow. Laura and Mary were allowed to eat the carrot after the milk had been squeezed out. Mary thought she ought to have the larger share because she was older, but Laura said she should have it because she was littler. But Ma said they must divide it evenly. It was very good. When the cream was ready, Ma scalded the long wooden churn dash, put it in the churn, and dropped the wood churn cover over it. The churn cover had a little round hole in the middle, and Ma moved the dash up and down through the hole. She churned for a long time. Mary could sometimes churn while Ma rested, but the dash was too heavy for Laura. At first, the splashes of cream showed thick and smooth around the little hole. After a long time, they began to look grainy. Then Ma churned more slowly, and on the dash there began to appear tiny grains of yellow butter. And this is what the churn looked like, and there's Mary working it. You see how it goes up and down? When Ma took off the churn cover, there was the butter in a golden lump drowning in the buttermilk. Then Ma took out the lump with a wooden paddle. Onto a wooden bowl she put it, and she washed it many times in cold water, turning it over and over and working it with the paddle until the water ran clear. That's because there'd be a little bit of that buttermilk in it, and it won't last so long if it has milk. After that, she salted it. Now came the best part of churning. Ma molded the butter. On a loose bottom of a wooden butter mold was carved the picture of a strawberry with 2 strawberry leaves. With the paddle, Ma packed the butter tightly into the mold until it was full. Then she turned it upside down over a plate. The little firm pat of golden butter came out with the strawberry and its leaves molded on the top. So it'd be so pretty. Laura and Mary watched breathlessly, one on each side as Ma, with the golden little butter pats, each with its strawberry on the top, dropped onto the plate as Ma put all the butter through the mold. Then Ma gave them each a drink of good fresh buttermilk. On Saturdays, when Ma made bread, they each had a little piece of dough to make into a little loaf. They might have a bit of cookie dough too, to make little cookies. And once Laura even made a pie in her patty pan. And I'll tell you what that is later. After the day's work was done, Ma sometimes cut paper dolls for them. She cut the dolls out of stiff white paper and drew the faces with a pencil. Then, from bits of colored paper, she cut dresses and hats and ribbons and laces so that Laura and Mary could dress their dolls beautifully. But the best time of all was at night when Pa came home. He would come in from his tramping through the snowy woods with tiny icicles dangling from the end of his mustache. He would hang his gun on the wall over the door, throw off his fur cap and mittens and coat, and called, "Where's my little half pint of sweet cider, half drunk up?" That was Laura, because she was so little. Laura and Mary would run to climb on his knees and sit there while he warmed himself by the fire. Then he would put on his coat and cap and mittens again and go out to do the chores and bring in plenty of wood for the fire. Sometimes when Pa walked his trap lines quickly because the traps were empty, or when he got home sooner than usual, he would come home early. Then he would have time to play with Laura and Mary. One game that they loved was called Mad Dog. Pa would run his fingers through his thick hair, standing it all up on end. Then he dropped on all fours, and growling, he'd chase Laura and Mary around the room trying to get them cornered where they couldn't get away. And this is what it looked like. That was a funny game. A scary game. They were quick at dodging and running, but once he got them caught against the woodbox behind the stove. They couldn't get past Pa, and there was no other way out. Then Pa growled so terribly. Arrgh! His hair was wild and his eyes so fierce it all seemed real. Mary was so frightened she could not move. But as Pa came nearer, Laura screamed, "Ah!" And with a wild leap and a scramble, she went over the woodbox, dragging Mary with her. And at once there was no mad dog at all. There was only Pa standing there with his blue eyes shining, looking at Laura. "Well," he said to her, "you're only a little half pint of cider half drunk up, but by jinks, you're as strong as a little French horse." "You shouldn't frighten the children so, Charles," Ma said. "Look at how big their eyes are." Pa looked, and then he took down his fiddle and he began to play and sing. Yankee Doodle went to town, he wore his striped trousies. He swore he couldn't see the town, there was so many houses. Mary and Laura forgot all about the bad dog. And there he saw some great big guns as big as a log of maple. Every time they turned around, it took 2 yoke of cattle. Every time they fired them off, it took a horn of powder. It made a noise like Father's gun, only a nation louder. Pa was keeping time with his foot, tapping his foot, and Laura clapped her hands to the music when he sang. And I'll sing Yankee Doodle Doo, and I'll sing Yankee Doodle, and I'll sing Yankee Doodle Doo, and I'll sing Yankee Doodle. All alone in the big woods, and the snow and the cold, the little log house was warm and snug and cozy. Pa and Ma, Laura and Mary, and baby Carrie were comfortable and happy there, especially at night. Then the fire was shining on the hearth, and the cold and the dark and the wild beasts were all shut out. And Jack the brindle bulldog and Black Susan cat lay blinking at the flames in the fireplace. Ma sat in a rocking chair, sewing by the light of the lamp on the table. The lamp was bright and shiny. There was salt in the bottom of a glass bowl with kerosene, to keep the kerosene from exploding. And there were little bits of red flannel among the salt to make it pretty. It was pretty. Do any of you have kerosene or oil lamps in your house for when the lights go out? I do, because I live way in the country, and the lights do go out pretty often in the wintertime or when there's a big storm. And so for light, I can have those. Laura loved to look at the lamp with its glass chimney so clean and sparkly, its yellow flame burning so steadily, and its bowl of clear kerosene colored red by the bits of flannel. She loved to look at the fire in the fireplace, flickering and changing all the time, burning yellow and red and sometimes green above the logs, and hovering blue over the golden and ruby coals. And then Pa told stories. When Laura and Mary begged him for a story, he would take them on his knees and tickle their faces with his long whiskers until they laughed aloud. His eyes were blue and merry. One night, Pa looked at Black Susan stretching herself before the fire and running her claws out and in, and he said, "Do you know that a panther is a cat?" We call them cougars here. "A great wild cat?" "No," said Laura. "Well, it is," said Pa. Just imagine Black Susan bigger than Jack and fiercer than Jack when he growls. Then he would be just like a panther. He settled Laura and Mary more comfortably on his knees and said, "I'll tell you about Grandpa and the panther." "Your grandpa?" Laura asked. No, Laura, your grandpa, my father." "Oh," Laura said, and she wiggled closer against Pa's arms. She knew her grandpa. He lived far away in the big woods in a big log house. Pa began the story of Grandpa and the panther. Here's what they think the panther could have looked like. A black one. "Your grandpa went to town one day and was starting home late. It was dark when he came riding his horse through the big woods, so dark he could hardly see the road. And when he heard a panther scream, he was frightened, for he had no gun." "How does a panther scream?" Laura asked. "Like a woman," Pa said, "like this. Ah!" Then he screamed so that Laura and Mary shivered with terror. Ma jumped out of her chair and said, "Mercy, Charles!" But Laura and Mary loved to be scared like that. The horse, with Grandpa on him, ran fast, for it was frightened too. But it could not get away from the panther. The panther followed through the dark woods. It was a hungry panther, and it came as fast as a horse could run. It screamed now on this side of the road, and then on that side, and it was always close behind. Grandpa leaned forward in the saddle and urged the horse to go faster. The horse was running as fast as it could possibly run, and still the panther screamed close behind. Then Grandpa caught a glimpse of it as it leaped from treetop to treetop, almost overhead. It was a huge black panther leaping through the air like Black Susan when she's leaping on a mouse. It was many, many times bigger than Black Susan. It was so big that if it leaped on Grandpa, it would have killed him with its enormous slashing claws and its long, sharp teeth. Grandpa and his horse was running away from it just like a mouse runs away from a cat. The panther did not scream anymore. Grandpa did not see it anymore, but he knew that it was coming, leaping after him in the dark woods behind him. The horse ran with all of its might. At last, the horse ran up to Grandpa's house. Now, this is what they think it looked like when that panther was following her grandpa. Grandpa saw the panther springing. Grandpa jumped off the horse against the door. He burst through the door and slammed it behind him. The panther landed on the horse's back just where Grandpa had been. The horse screamed terribly and ran. He was running away to the big woods with the panther riding on its back and ripping his back with his claws. But Grandpa grabbed his gun from the wall, got to the window just in time to shoot that panther dead. Grandpa said he would never again go into the big woods without his gun. When Pa told this story, Laura and Mary shivered and snuggled close to him. They were safe and snug on his knees, with his strong arms around them. They liked to be there, before the warm fire with Black Susan purring on the hearth and the good dog Jack stretched out beside her. When they heard the wolf howl, "Woo! Woo!" Jack's head lifted and the hairs rose stiff along his back. But Laura and Mary listened to that lonely sound in the dark and the cold of the big woods, and they were not afraid. They were cozy and comfortable in their little house made of logs. and the snow drifted around it, and the wind crying because it could not get in by the fire. That's the end of chapter 2, Winter Days. I liked that one. Where I live, we have cougars. And a long time ago, a cougar came through the treetops after my son Jason. And he went to shoot, but his gun jammed. That means it could not shoot. And that was a bad situation. He had shot already once. So my husband, his dad, heard, and he went running out with a gun. And Donnie shot off his gun, and that made the cougar turn around and go away instead of chasing after Jason anymore. It was after dark. It was very scary. But when we're in our house, we're safe. And I have 2 dogs. And I think they would warn me if there was ever a cougar by. The only thing that they don't warn me about is skunks. They always have to go chase a skunk. And do you know what happens when you chase a skunk? That's right. The skunk sprays them and they smell horrible. And they come running back to me. And then I have to give them a bath. Yuck. Well, I'll be reading chapter 3 to you tomorrow. Hope you like these stories. I think they're fun. All right. I want to remind you, I love you, I really do. But even more importantly, God loves you, and He always will. Good night.